So, Paul, how long is the ACC Grant of Rights?
It's until 2036.
It's a one-way street, right? I mean, you sign it. The ESPN is committed to 2036, and so are the teams. It's not the teams, it's the conference that is in the Grant of Rights. The teams are under the conference umbrella.
Yeah.
What would you say if I told you, Craig, that if Florida State or Clemson, North Carolina, whoever, wanted to leave, they would have to break the Grant of Rights or challenge the Grant of Rights, and if they and that's it, if they wanted to leave. What about the fact that I have not heard this but a couple of different places? The Grant of Rights with ESPN is until 2036. What if there was a kick-in clause that ESPN was to have that could change or end the Grant of Rights earlier?
I mean, cool. I get that's. Yeah, I don't know. Tell me more, I guess.
Okay.
I don't ever.
So let's say that ESPN has the ability, like, for example, I used Jimbo Fisher's contract. It's a one-way street. Jimbo Fisher got the money. It was guaranteed no matter if he's fired after the first, fifth, or ninth, or 10th year, right? However long he lasted. What about that ESPN might have an ability, if they wanted to change the Grant of Rights where it dissipates and the ACC goes back on the open market and possibly turns into the Pac-12?
That would be interesting.
Why would they turn into the Pac-12?
Because then they're out there floating, and you never know where teams start to go elsewhere, and the next thing you know, you have a conference that could dissipate.
So if they opted out of the deal, so if in, say, 3 to 7 years, they opt out like in the middle of the deal.
If ESPN decides we want to redo the Grant of Rights and we'll let you go on the open market, knowing that no matter what, they could probably re-sign the ACC with about the same amount of money, but maybe even give them less.
My first comment would be, why would ESPN do that? That would be stupid when they've got a sweetheart of a deal, unless they've got some grand master plan, which, based on all the moves that we've seen,
because they could then sign it back for less.
Okay, yeah, I'm confused, I guess.
Okay, so
I'm sorry, I'm confused. I don't quite get it.
If the ACC all of a sudden has the Grant of Rights dissipate before 2036, what happens, Paul? What could happen?
Well, I mean, Florida State at least is going to leave.
Why just Florida State?
Well, I mean, I just said at least them, because they've already said they're going to. Clemson has been a far less public with this, but you would assume that they would leave and other schools would leave as well, because now they're not tethered to the Grant of Rights, of which they are trying to get out of. So if ESPN did that, they would put teams on the open market, meaning they could go to whatever conference they wanted to, because there's no longer a contract
to
that
a conference that ESPN also has,
so they could go to the SEC. So that clears it up. That's what I'm saying. Like, why would they do that?
But they could also go to the Big Ten.
Sure, yeah. But
now, I from what I'm being told, don't be surprised. FSU's been barking now, right? For throughout the year. FSU's been barking. They thought about last week looking at challenging the Grant of Rights again. I don't know if they've ever officially challenged it other than barked. They were thinking about last week again challenging the Grant of Rights. Not just saying it, but challenging it. But because of the Heisman Trophy and because of the relationship tradition of Army-Navy, and because coming off what would look incredibly bitter, although they have a right to feel that way, the college football playoff standings, they decided against doing it last week. Do not be surprised if they don't launch something between now and the first of the year.
Well, look,
they would be the first to do so. It would not be North Carolina. It would not be Clemson. It would not be in conjunction with anybody else. It would be, if in fact that happens, look for it to possibly happen. And I hate to use that word possibly. I don't want to throw things against the wall, but it would be before the first of the year.
Yeah, I think they're at least gonna start barking again, like whether it's an actual challenge, because the only thing I can think that they would say is that, this agreement is antiquated, but then, I mean, so is a lot of things. Like, that's not, talking to a couple of people that I have that are lawyers, just asking them about in general, like when you look at a contract, like if you've been looking at it for a year and you can't figure out a strategy, like, isn't there not a strategy? Like, If you've got teams, like this is not just one guy in a room, like going through this and like trying to find it. They've got like a team of people looking at this, trying to find a way out. Now, if they have, and they just have decided not to do it yet because they don't know what their other options are, that's one thing. But I would think that given the way that these things can move really fast, if they had a golden ticket to get out of the thing, we would have heard about that by now.
Yeah, we've had lawyers around the clock, working around the clock. Now, one of the other things about ESPN, if they do have an option, in fact, to change and go, okay, we're not going to do 2036. We're going to do this in 2029 or 2030 or 2027. One of the issues with that, and Craig, you brought this up in a way, is that they already have the ACC for a pretty low price.
Right, like that's the part is, okay, so that's what I was trying to get clarification on. Okay, if your goal, if your ESPN is to get Florida State to the SEC, well, then that answers the question. That's what you would rather have than this sweetheart of a deal that you have with the ACC. I could see where that's the driving force in wanting to open it back up. So, I mean, that would make sense. Like, yeah, we want to get North Carolina and Virginia and Clemson and FSU into the SEC. Sure, let's open it back up, and we can get them on their way and get them where they're still basically under our umbrella. Now, the Big Ten that's a different network, though. That's different
Fox,
networks.
Yep. CBS,
so that's not as clear cut on how that would work. So, yeah, I mean, that's just the part that I was confused about. But, yeah, if they could gain FSU in the SEC and have like a 20-team mega conference, and then I could see where that would be enticing to them to open that up. But it leaves a lot of other questions about what happens to the rest. Like, I'm confused on the PAC part of where that came into play.
What I'm saying about that is if that all of a sudden you have a conference without a home,
right,
then there could be what happened with the Pac-12, where everybody just like,
I thought you were saying they would become the Pac-12.
No. It would become very similar to the Pac-12. And when you have Charlie Baker of the NCAA talking about subdivisions,
right,
that would even leave more of an opportunity to have the two super conferences, SEC and Big Ten, and then all of a sudden, possibly whether it's called the Big 12 or what it's called, whatever it might be, forming into yet another one of those, maybe not as super, but would be somewhat of a super conference.
Yeah, I mean that's clarity that I was looking for, right, because I thought you were saying that they would like absorb into the Pac-12. I was like, why would the Pac-12 have the upper hand all of a sudden?
The analogy of what happened.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, it would be like that, I guess. I mean, what kind of legal battles are you looking at if all of a sudden, I mean, I don't know, because again, this is the legal stuff and I didn't go to school for that, but you're leaving a lot of teams out in the lurch all of a sudden without a deal that they were locked into for the next decade plus. I don't know how that flies in courts and whatnot, but yeah, I'd be a little bit concerned about that if I was a number of other teams that wouldn't be on the Big Ten or the SEC radar.
A few years ago, maybe less than a decade ago, the SEC, when looking at the possibility of adding new teams, looking at the future, the two schools that were probably most discussed at the time, believe it or not, were not Texas and OU, but OU and Virginia. Because everyone in the SEC thought that Texas would not be available, thinking that Texas was going to join the Big Ten.
Okay.
So there's a little bit of background on that. Who would be left in limbo? Louisville, Pitt, Duke, Miami, NC State. And they would fit maybe differently in different conferences. Some of them, of course, would want to be here or there, but those are some schools. And Louisville, I think, has always, for some reason, been kind of on a Big 12 radar and vice versa.
Well, they were on the Big 12 radar.
And vice versa.
They should have already been here, in my opinion. Like, no offense to West Virginia. I was thrilled that West Virginia, and continue to be thrilled that West Virginia got in, but I thought Louisville made a whole lot more sense at the time than West Virginia did when they added them, but Louisville went to the ACC. Honestly, like, had those things been switched, I think it would have made a whole lot, at least more sense geographically, but hey, it is what it is now.
Nothing can happen no matter what anyone is saying about speculation involving the ACC teams, because let's say somebody does try to force the grant of rights or try to bust it. Is that going to be a 6-month process, a year? Is that going to be a year and a half? Is that going to be 2? And one of the reasons why Oregon State, Washington State, which has also been floated out there by some, and what might be of interest to the Big 12, They have to figure out their own situation right now in
That's
the
what
conference that they're in the Pac-12 and the revenue that they might get or what they get.
That's all I said from day number one about that is like there was nothing imminent back in the beginning of the football season, and here we are, and it's 2.5, 3 months later. So I think to me that's crossed imminent. Maybe for others their definition is different, but at this point there's a lot of curiosity about what's going on with them, and nothing's been solidified there. I mean, there's been a ruling of their in charge of the decisions, and they're technically the ruling body, but then you had now it's where they have to cooperate with the other 10 schools, and they have to they can't just go and grab all the money and run with it. And so there's a little bit of a standoff right now in terms of there's not a clean break, and so until that's determined of where that money's going to go and who's going to have it, then it's hard to say what actually happens with them. And meanwhile, they're planning their schedule for next year and their Mountain West Alliance and what that's going to look like. But I think the big holdup in just saying go add those schools was, well, what if this blows up on the other side of the country? Is that maybe where more of the focus needs to lie right now, as opposed to 2 schools that are going to be there for you and available once they get their court case settled and done with, whenever that happens, whether it's now or it's in the next year or whatever. That's that people don't quite know right now with Oregon State and Washington State, is how long could this potentially dragged out. Ideally, you would have had an agreement put in place. You would have mediated this and been done with it, but they're obviously not coming to an agreement right now, so it just continues on. And for how long, who knows? But as long as it does, then you can't really make solidified plans for the future. You do the Mountain West schedule for a year, and then I guess see where you are here in a few more months and what that could look like. But in the meantime, while that's held up, I think everybody's looking out east and saying, all right, what's potentially going to happen here? And when you had the playoff decision that came down, I don't know if that really added much gas to it or not, but it certainly seemed to add gas to the idea of, they're going to want to, Florida State in particular, go somewhere else where they'll, I guess, have a bit more respect.
So with anybody left in the Pac-12, which is Oregon State, Washington State, they have, again, that ship pretty much sailed. They themselves have to figure out their own Pac-12 revenue before they even think about anything else. In the ACC, how long would it take? Months, a year, or 2 or 4 to find out if, in fact, that grant of rights can truly be challenged in court and win. And if you challenge it and you lose voting rights in the ACC, and you also might lose some revenue that's taken away from you by the conference if you do that. Officially try to do that. Scott Drew, national champion.